Friends, if you want to watch super hit movie Rain Man in English, then you must like this video. If you are visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Friends, in today's video, the movie we're going to talk about is called Rain Man. We will talk about what this movie is and where you can watch all the interesting facts about this movie in today's video. I'm going to tell you. I am also going to give you all the information on which platform or on which satellite channel you will get to watch this movie. Also, we will talk in detail about the technical department, music department, pre-production, filming, post-production, budget, box office collection of this film. We will also talk about the story of this film, and I will also give you a small review of the story of this film. Apart from this, we will discuss about the facts of this film's storyline, star cast actors' performance in the film, and which character has played which role. That's why I request you friends to watch this video till the end. So let's start the video. Rain Man is a 1988 American road comedy drama film directed by Barry Levi, ensign and written by Barry Morrow and Ronald Bass. It tells the story of abrasive and selfish wheeler dealer Charlie Babbitt, Tom Cruise, who discovers that his estranged father has died and bequeathed his multi-million-dollar estate to his other son, Raymond, Dustin Hoffman, an autistic savant whose existence Charlie was unaware of. Morrow created the character of Raymond after meeting real-life savant Kim Peek. His characterization was based on both Peek and Bill Sachter, a good friend of Morrow, who was the subject of Bill, an earlier film that Morrow wrote. Rain Man competed at the 39th Berlin International Film Festival, where it won the highest prize, the Golden Bear. The film was released theatrically by MGM UA Communications Co. under the United Artists label in the United States on December 16, 1988, to critical and commercial success. Praise was given to Levinson's direction, the performances, particularly Cruise and Hoffman, the screenplay, the musical score, the cinematography, and the film's portrayal of autism. The film grossed $354 million on a $25 million budget, becoming the highest-grossing film of 1988, and received a leading 8 nominations at the 61st Academy Awards, winning 4, more than any other film nominated. Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor for Hoffman, and Best Original Screenplay. As of 2024, Rain Man is the only film to win both the Berlin International Film Festival's highest award and the Academy Award for Best Picture in the same year. It was also the last film released by Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer (MGM) to be nominated for Best Picture until Licorice Pizza in 2021, 33 years later. But arrogant collectibles dealer Charlie Babbitt is in the middle of importing 4 gray market Lamborghinis to Los Angeles for resale. He needs to deliver the cars to impatient buyers who have already made down payments to repay the loan he took out to buy them. But the EPA is holding the cars at the port because they have failed emission tests. Charlie directs an employee to lie to the buyers while he stalls his creditor. When Charlie learns that his estranged father, Sanford Babbitt, has died, he and his girlfriend Susanna travel to Cincinnati to settle the estate. He inherits only a group of rose bushes and a classic 1949 Buick Roadmaster convertible over which he and Sanford had clashed, while the remainder of the $3 million estate is going to an unnamed trustee. He learns that the money is being directed to a local mental institution where he meets his elder brother Raymond, of whom he was unaware. Raymond is an autistic savant and adheres to strict routines. He has superb recall, but he shows little emotional expression, except when in distress. Charlie spirits Raymond out of the mental institution and into a hotel for the night. Disheartened with the way Charlie treats Raymond, Susanna leaves him. Charlie asks Raymond's doctor, Dr. Gerald Bruner, for half the estate in exchange for Raymond's return, but Bruner refuses. Charlie decides to attempt to gain custody of his brother to get control of the money. After Raymond refuses to fly to Los Angeles, he and Charlie resort to driving there instead. They make slow progress because Raymond insists on sticking to his routines, which include watching the People's Court on television every day, getting to bed by 11 p.m., and refusing to travel when it rains. He also objects to traveling on the interstate after they encounter a car accident. During the course of the journey, Charlie learns more about Raymond, including his ability to instantly perform complex calculations and count hundreds of objects at once, far beyond the normal range of human abilities. He also realizes that Raymond had lived with the family as a child and was the Rain Man. Charlie's infantile pronunciation of Raymond, a comforting figure Charlie had remembered as an imaginary friend. Raymond had saved an infant Charlie from being scalded by hot bathwater one day, but Sanford blamed Raymond for nearly injuring Charlie and committed him to the institution, as he was unable to speak up for himself and correct the misunderstanding. Charlie's creditor repossesses the Lamborghinis, forcing him to refund his buyers' down payments and leaving him deeply in debt. Having passed Las Vegas, he and Raymond return to Caesar's Palace and devise a plan to win the needed money by playing blackjack and counting cards. Although the casino bosses obtain videotape evidence of the scheme and ask them to leave, Charlie successfully wins $86,000 to cover his debts. He also reconciles with Susanna, who has rejoined the brothers in Las Vegas. Returning to Los Angeles, Charlie meets with Bruner, who offers him $250,000 to walk away from Raymond. Charlie refuses, saying he is no longer upset about being cut out of his father's will, but he wants to have a relationship with his brother. At a meeting with a court-appointed psychiatrist, Raymond proves to be unable to decide for himself what he wants. Charlie stops the questioning and tells Raymond he is happy to have him as his brother. As Raymond and Bruner board a train to return to the institution, Charlie promises to visit in 2 weeks. Cast a Sir, Dustin Hoffman as Raymond Babbitt, Tom Cruise as Charlie Babbitt, Valeria Golino as Susanna, Jerry Molen as Dr. Gerald Bruner, Ralph Seymour as Lenny, Michael D. Roberts as Vern, Bonnie Hunt as Sally Dibbs, the waitress, Beth Grant as Mother at Farmhouse, Lucinda Jenny as Iris, Barry Levinson as Doctor, Bob Heckle as Sheriff Deputy. Production. Development. In drafting the story for Rain Man, Barry Morrow decided to base Raymond Babbitt on his experiences with both Kim Peek and Bill Sachter, two men who had gained notoriety and fame for their intellectual disabilities, and in Peek's case, for his abilities as a savant that were evident in high-speed reading and extremely detailed memory. Prior to the conception of Rain Man, Morrow had formed a friendship with the intellectually disabled Sachter, and in doing so, ended up taking some situational aspects from his friendship and using them to help craft the relationship between Charlie and Raymond. Following the success of Bill, the made-for-TV movie he had written about Sachter, Morrow met Kim Peek and was wildly intrigued by his savant syndrome. Going into the creation of the film, Morrow was still essentially unaware of the intricacies of the condition, as well as of autism itself, instead deciding that the movie was less about Raymond's intellectual disability and more about the relationship formed between Raymond and Charlie. Roger Birnbaum was the first studio executive to give the film a green light. He did so immediately after Barry Morrow pitched the story. Birnbaum received special thanks in the film's credits. Real-life brothers Dennis and Randy Quaid were considered for the roles of Raymond Babbitt and Charles Babbitt. Agents at Creative Artists Agency sent the script to Dustin Hoffman and Bill Murray, envisioning Murray in the title role and Hoffman in the role eventually portrayed by Tom Cruise. Martin Brest, Steven Spielberg, and Sidney Pollack were directors also involved in the film. Spielberg was attached to the film for 5 months until he left to direct Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and he would later regret the decision. Mickey Rourke was also offered a role, but he turned it down. Mel Gibson was also offered the role of Raymond, but he turned it down. For a year prior to playing Raymond Babbitt, Hoffman prepared to portray Raymond's autism by seeking out and educating himself on other autistic people, particularly those with savant syndrome. Hoffman had some experience with disabled individuals prior to filming, having worked at the New York Psychiatric Institute when he was younger. Inspiration for the portrayal of Raymond Babbitt's mannerisms was drawn from a multitude of sources, but he thanked 3 men in his Oscar acceptance speech. One was Peter Guthrie, the autistic brother of Kevin Guthrie, a Princeton football player with whom Hoffman was in touch at the time. Another was autistic savant Joseph Sullivan, who was the subject of 2 documentary films and whose mother, Dr. Ruth Sullivan, was the founding president of the Autism Society of America and served as a consultant on the film. The third was savant Kim Peek, with whom Hoffman met as part of his research of the role, wherein he would observe and mimic Peek's actions, attempting to give an accurate portrayal of what an individual with savant syndrome might act like. His mimicry of Peek's savant syndrome was deemed a poor fit for the character by Hoffman, resulting in Hoffman's decision to make Babbitt not only a man with savant syndrome, but also with autism. Filming. Principal photography included 9 weeks of filming on location in Cincinnati and throughout northern Kentucky. Other portions were shot in the desert near Palm Springs, California, 168 to 71. There was originally a different ending to the movie drafted by Morrow that differed from Raymond's going back to the institution. Morrow ultimately decided to drop this ending in favor of Raymond's returning to the institution, as he felt the original ending would not have stuck with the viewers as effectively as the revised ending did. Almost all of the principal photography occurred during the 1988 Writers Guild of America strike. One key scene that was affected by the lack of writers was the film's final scene. Bass delivered his last draft of the script only hours before the strike started and spent no time on the set. Box office. Rain Man debuted December 16, 1988, and was the second highest grossing film at the weekend box office behind Twins with $7 million. It reached the first spot the weekend of December 30th to January 2nd, finishing 1988 with $42 million. The film would become the highest-grossing U.S. film of 1988 by earning more than $172 million. Worldwide figures vary, though. Box Office Mojo claims that the film grossed over $354 million worldwide, while the numbers reported that the film grossed $412.8 million worldwide. Reception. On review aggregator website Rotten Tomatoes, Rain Man holds an approval rating of 88% based on 136 reviews, with an average rating of 8.10/10. The website's critical consensus states, "This road trip movie about an autistic savant and his callow brother is far from seamless, but Barry Levinson's direction is impressive, and strong performances from Tom Cruise and Dustin Hoffman add to its appeal." Metacritic assigned the film a weighted average score of 65 out of 100 based on 18 critics indicating generally favorable reviews. Audiences polled by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of A on a scale of A+ to F. Vincent Canby of the New York Times called Rain Man becomingly modest, decently thought out, sometimes funny film. Hoffman's performance was a display of sustained virtuosity that makes no lasting connections with the emotions. Its end effect depends largely on one's susceptibility to the sight of an actor acting nonstop and extremely well, but to no particularly urgent dramatic purpose. Canby considered the film's true central character to be the confused, economically and emotionally desperate Charlie, beautifully played by Mr. Cruise. Roger Ebert gave the film 3.5 stars out of 4. He wrote, "Hoffman proves again that he almost seems to thrive on impossible acting challenges. I felt a certain love for Raymond, the Hoffman character. I don't know quite how Hoffman got me to do it." Gene Siskel also gave the film 3.5 stars out of 4, singling out Cruise for praise. The strength of the film is really that of Cruise's performance. The combination of 2 superior performances makes the movie worth watching. Amy Dawes of Variety wrote that one of the year's most intriguing film premises is given uneven, slightly off-target treatment. She called the road scenes hastily, loosely written, with much extraneous screen time, but admired the last third of the film, calling it a depiction of 2 very isolated beings who discover a common history and deep attachment. One of the film's harshest reviews came from the New Yorker magazine critic Pauline Kael, who said, "Everything in this movie is fudged ever so humanistically in a perfunctory, low-pressure way. And the picture has its effectiveness. People are crying at it. Of course they're crying at it. It's a piece of wet kitsch." Rain Man was placed on 39 critics' 10 best lists in 1988, based on a poll of the nation's top 100 critics. Legacy. The release of Rain Man in 1988 coincided with a tenfold increase in funding for medical research and diagnoses of individuals for autism. The latter is primarily due to autism's being more broadly defined in newer editions of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, particularly versions 3R and 4, 389 to 401. The movie is credited, however, with significantly increasing awareness of autism among the general public. 3v4 380. Rain Man is known in particular for its portrayal of a man with both autism and savant skills, leading much of its viewing audience to incorrectly assume the intellectual capabilities of autistic people at large. Characters like Raymond Babbitt, whose characterization has been criticized for adhering to stereotypes, are portrayed as having an otherworldly intellectual ability that, rather than disable them from living a normal life, instead assists them in a nearly magical way. Although having savant abilities is certainly a possibility for autistic individuals, the combination is incredibly rare. Conversely, Rain Man has also been seen as dispelling a number of other misconceptions about autism and improving public awareness of the failure of many agencies to accommodate autistic people and make use of the abilities they do have, regardless of whether they have savant skills or not. Since Dustin Hoffman's 1989 Academy Award win for his performance in Rain Man, about half of all Best Actor trophies have been awarded for portrayals of characters who are disabled in some way. None of these recipients share their characters' disabilities in real life. Just 1 year after Hoffman's win, Daniel Day-Lewis, thus far the only actor to have won 3 awards in the category, garnered his first Best Actor win for his portrayal of cerebral palsy patient Christy Brown in My Left Foot. The Academy's incentivizing of such casting practices has drawn criticism from disabled actors and self-advocates who argue that these decisions sideline more authentic stories about disabled characters in favor of leveraging already established actors' prestige. This pattern has even been satirized by the 2008 film Tropic Thunder, in which Tom Cruise also appears, wherein Robert Downey Jr.'s character, Kirk Lazarus, chastises a fellow actor for portraying a character whose developmental disability is deemed too alienating for a mainstream audience. Rain Man is also known for popularizing the misconception that card counting is illegal in the United States. In 2006, the film was recognized by the American Film Institute in their list of 100 years, .100 Cheers at number 63. In popular culture, the cold open sketch in the April 1, 1989 installment of Saturday Night Live spoofed both the film and the Pete Rose gambling scandal at the time. Charlie and Raymond Babbitt were played by Ben Stiller and Dana Carvey, respectively, with Phil Hartman as Rose. References to Rain Man, Dustin Hoffman's performance in particular, have become a popular shorthand for autism and savantism. In the final episode of the first season of Community, Pierce calls Abed Rain Man when listing members of the study group had been described previously as having Asperger's syndrome, which is now diagnosed as autism spectrum disorder. Qantas and airline controversy. In June 1989, at least 15 major airlines showed edited versions of Rain Man that omitted the scene involving Raymond's refusal to fly, mentioning the crashes of American Airlines Flight 625, Delta Airlines Flight 1901, and Continental Airlines Flight 1713, except on Australia-based Qantas. Those criticizing this decision included film director Barry Levinson, co-screenwriter Ronald Bass, and George Kurgo, at the time the president of the Writers Guild of America West. "I think it's a key scene to the entire movie," Levinson said in a telephone interview. "That's why it's in there. It launches their entire odyssey across country, because they couldn't fly." Although some of those airlines cited as justification avoiding having airplane passengers feel uncomfortable in sympathy with Raymond during the in-flight entertainment, the scene was shown intact on flights of Qantas, and commentators noted that Raymond mentions it as the only airline whose planes have never crashed. The film is credited with introducing Qantas's safety record to U.S. consumers. However, contrary to the claims made in the film, Qantas aircraft have been involved in a number of fatal accidents since the airline's founding in 1920, although none involving jet aircraft, with the last incident taking place in December 1951. The Buick convertible. Two 1949 Roadmaster convertibles were used in the filming, one of which had its rear suspension stiffened to bear the additional load of camera equipment and a cameraman. After filming completed, the unmodified car was acquired by Hoffman, who had it restored and added it to his collection. He kept it for 34 years. Hemmings Motor News reported that the car was auctioned in January 2022 by Bonhams in Scottsdale, Arizona, and sold for $335,000. The camera-carrying car was similarly acquired by Barry Levinson, who had it restored by Wayne Carini of the Chasing Classic Cars television series a few years later. Is it possible to have a relationship with an autistic person? Is it possible to have a relationship with a cat? I do not intend the comparison to be demeaning to the autistic. I am simply trying to get at something. I have useful relationships with both of my cats, and they are important to me. But I never know what the cats are thinking. That is precisely the situation that Charlie Babbitt, Tom Cruise, is faced with in Rain Man. His brother, Raymond Dustin Hoffman, is high-level autistic. He can carry on conversations, stick to a schedule, compile baseball statistics, memorize dinner menus, and become disturbed when anything upsets his routine. He can also count 46 spilled toothpicks in an instant and calculate square roots in a flash. But what he is thinking? There is a moment in Rain Man that crystallizes all the frustrations that Charlie feels about Raymond, a moment when he cries out, "I know there has to be somebody inside there." But who and where? Rain Man is so fascinating because it refuses to supply those questions with sentimental but unrealistic answers. This is not a movie like Charlie in which there is a miracle cure. Rain Man works so well within Raymond's limitations because it is a movie about limitations, particularly Charlie's own limited ability to love those in his life or to see things from their point of view. As the film opens, we see Charlie frantically trying to juggle his way out of a crisis in his Los Angeles business, which seems to consist of selling expensive imported automobiles out of his hip pocket. He is driven, unhappy, a workaholic. One day he receives word that his father, a man with whom he has had no contact for years, has died back east. At the reading of the will, he learns that he has received a pittance, including a prize 1949 Buick Roadmaster, and that his father's $3 million fortune has gone into a trust. Who is the trust for? Performing some amateur detective work, Charlie discovers with a shock that it goes to support an older brother he never knew he had, an autistic brother who has been institutionalized for years. Visiting Raymond at the home where he lives, Charlie finds a methodical, mechanical, flat-voiced, middle-aged man who definitely knows things, such as that tapioca pudding is definitely on the menu, and that his favorite TV program is definitely about to come on the air. Rain Man follows this discovery with a storyline that is as old as the hills. Angry that he has been cut out of his share of the inheritance, Charlie takes Raymond out of the mental home and vows to bring him to live in California. But Raymond will not fly. He definitely recites the dates and fatalities of every airline's most recent crash. And so Charlie puts Raymond in the front seat of the 1949 Buick, and they head out on a cross-country odyssey of discovery. It is an old formula, but a serviceable one, using shots of the car against the sunset as punctuation. The two brothers meet genuine, actual Americans on the road, of course, and have strange adventures, of course. And although we have seen this structure in dozens of other movies, it is new this time because for Raymond, it is definitely not a voyage of discovery. Everything changes in the movie, except for Raymond. In a roadside diner somewhere along the way, he still stubbornly insists on the routines of the dining room in his mental institution. The maple syrup is definitely supposed to be on the table before the pancakes come. Charlie at first does not quite seem to accept the dimensions of Raymond's world and grows frustrated at what looks like almost willful intractability. Eventually, toward the end of the journey, he finds that he loves his brother, and that love involves accepting him exactly as he is. Rain Man is a project that Hoffman and Cruise have been determined to bring to the screen for a long time. Barry Levinson came on board after 3 previous directors signed off on this material. The problem, of course, was Raymond. If fiction is about change, then how can you make a movie about a man who cannot change, whose whole life is anchored and defended by routine? Few actors could get anywhere with this challenge, and fewer still could absorb and even entertain us with their performance. But Hoffman proves again that he almost seems to thrive on impossible acting challenges. "You want taller?" he asks in the audition scene in Tootsie. "I can play taller." "You want shorter? I can play shorter." "You want a tomato?" And he can play autistic. At the end of Rain Man, I felt a certain love for Raymond, the Hoffman character. I don't know quite how Hoffman got me to do it. He does not play cute, or lovable, or pathetic. He is matter-of-fact, straight down the middle, uninflected, unmoved, uncomprehending in all of his scenes, except when his routine is disrupted, when he grows disturbed until it is restored. And yet I could believe that the Cruise character was beginning to love him, because that was how I felt too. I loved him for what he was, not for what he was not or could not be. The changes in the movie all belong to Charlie, who begins the film as a me-first materialist, a would-be Trump without a line of credit. By the end of the film, Charlie has learned how to pay attention, how to listen, and how to be at least a little patient some of the time. He does not undergo a spiritual transformation. He simply gets in touch with things that are more important than selling cars. He is aided in this process by his girlfriend, Susanna, Valeria Golino, a Latina who loves him but despairs of ever getting him off autopilot. By the end of Rain Man, what have we learned? I think the film is about acceptance. Charlie Babbitt's first appearance in the movie has him wheeling and dealing in the face of imminent ruin, trying to control his life and the lives of others by blind, arrogant willpower. What Raymond teaches him is that he can relax, because try as he might, he will always be powerless over other people. They will do just about what they choose to do, no matter how loud Charlie Babbitt screams. Raymond has a lot he can teach Charlie about acceptance, even if it is the solitary thing he knows. Rain Man, American dramatic film, released in 1988 and starring Tom Cruise and Dustin Hoffman, that was a hit with both critics and audiences and won 4 Academy Awards, including that for Best Picture, as well as 2 Golden Globe Awards, including that for Best Drama. Read Martin Scorsese's Britannica essay on film preservation. In Los Angeles, Charlie Babbitt, Cruise, a driven salesman, learns that a shipment of 4 Lamborghini sports cars, which are to be delivered to the customers to whom he has sold them, are being held up in port because they do not meet U.S. Environmental Protection Agency EPA emission standards. Charlie nonetheless heads out for a weekend trip with his co-worker and girlfriend, Susanna Valeria Golino. On the road, he receives a phone call telling him that his estranged father has died in Cincinnati, Ohio. He and Susanna fly there to attend the funeral. He finds that his father has left him only a 1949 Buick Roadmaster, which Charlie had driven without permission when he was 16 years old, an escapade that resulted in his spending 2 nights in jail and in his estrangement from his father. And some rose bushes, and that the rest of the $3 million estate has been bequeathed to an unnamed trustee. The trustee proves to be the director of the Walbrook Institute, a facility for the care of the developmentally disabled, and the money is earmarked for the care of Raymond, an elder brother of whose existence Charlie was previously unaware. Charlie and Susanna go to Walbrook to meet both Dr. Bruner, Gerald R. Molen, and Raymond Hoffman. Raymond is an autistic savant, and Dr. Bruner spends some time explaining Raymond's abilities and limitations to Charlie. Charlie takes Raymond out of the facility without permission, and the 2 brothers and Susanna spend the night in a motel room. When Raymond becomes agitated, however, Charlie is angered and speaks harshly to him. Because of this, and because Charlie declares that his plan is to hold on to Raymond until Dr. Bruner agrees to give Charlie half the money in the trust, Susanna leaves Charlie. Charlie tries to board a plane to Los Angeles with Raymond, but Raymond refuses to fly, so they set out to drive to Los Angeles in the Roadmaster. After Raymond witnesses an accident on the highway, it becomes necessary to use only back roads for the journey. Along the way, Charlie learns to accommodate Raymond's need for adherence to an invariable routine, such as maintaining strict mealtimes and watching the television shows The People's Court and Jeopardy every day. He also finds out that when he was a baby, Raymond inadvertently scalded him while trying to give him a bath, and that the event resulted in Raymond's being sent to live at Walbrook. In addition, he learns that his early childhood memories of an imaginary friend called Rain Man were in fact memories of Raymond. The impoundment of the Lamborghinis has left Charlie in debt, and after finding that Raymond has heightened abilities of calculation and of recall, Charlie takes Raymond to a casino in Las Vegas, where Raymond counts cards at the blackjack table and thus helps Charlie win enough money to cover his debt. Charlie also reconciles with Susanna in Las Vegas. By the time they reach his home in Los Angeles, Charlie has found that he is more interested in caring for Raymond than in getting the money. He meets with Dr. Bruner and a psychiatrist, played by director Barry Levinson, to determine whether Raymond prefers to remain with Charlie or be cared for at Walbrook. But when it becomes clear that Raymond cannot understand the choice that he is being presented with, Charlie agrees that Raymond should return to Walbrook with Dr. Bruner and promises Raymond that he will visit him in 2 weeks. Hoffman was widely praised for the authenticity of his performance, though the movie was blamed for creating a public misperception that a large percentage of autistic individuals were also savants. Rain Man was the first film to win both the Academy Award for Best Picture and the Berlin International Film Festival's Golden Bear. I have my disagreements with legendary film critic Pauline Kael, some of them fairly intense, but one thing I'll never fault her for: she could write a hell of a sentence. And there's no sentence of hers I co-sign more eagerly than the one that she used to start her review of Rain Man, the highest-grossing film of 1988 at the domestic box office, and winner of that year's Oscar for Best Picture. Rain Man is Dustin Hoffman humping one note on a piano for 2 hours and 11 minutes. Everything is there. It's mean, it's dirty, and therefore funny and memorable, and it neatly inverts the usual conversation around this kind of film. The kind that's sort of bland and forgettable, except that it has one barn burner of a performance that makes everybody talk about it like it's good. These films get nominated for Best Picture all the time. Rain Man is one of the few that actually won. In the case of Rain Man, Hoffman's showy performance made up almost entirely of lines that, because of his clipped atonal line delivery, immediately entered the pop culture lexicon. I'm a good driver, definitely. X minutes to Wapner. Hot water burn baby. Look, I don't like the lines. People in 1988 did. Was front and center in the critical praise, the conversation surrounding the film, and the audience love that led to the astonishing box office. Really, the box office is just mind-blowing. This made $172 million at the domestic box office and $412 million worldwide in 1988 dollars. Release this exact kind of story today. I can't imagine it making half that much in today dollars. It is, to me, the single most inexplicable box office run of the 1980s. But anyway, I was saying Rain Man is Hoffman's performance in a lot of ways, and the performance is not good. It is a cartoon. Kael's one note is incorrect only if we want to permit it to have two. The clipped, short pronunciation of words and the inflexible body language, which finds Hoffman waddling woodenly and stiffly, shifting only when he has to dart his hands up to the side of his head during one of the character's overstimulated freakouts. He does, to be altogether fair, sometimes shift his line deliveries to slightly emphasize punchlines, but this feels much more like the actor helping to keep the script going, rather than telling us something about the character. The whole thing is garish and superficial, a simple set of infinitely repeatable tricks that are focused purely on the most superficial behaviors that he supposes to be associated with autism. Even allowing that autism was understood less in 1988 than it is in 2020, I am fairly confident that it was understood better than this. It is maybe the performance that the script requires. Hence I say not good rather than bad, for bad implies that it's doing some damage to the film, but it's not impressive. It's barely persuasive. I am at all points during the film watching Dustin Hoffman do acting exercises. I am never watching Raymond Babbitt, and so I never learn about him. The thing about Rain Man is that despite Hoffman's omnipresence in the 1988-89 award season, is that it's not his film, and he's not the lead. He's the conduit by which the lead undergoes his own arc. A prop, I might say, if I wanted to be exactly as generous to the film's treatment of Raymond as I believe it deserves. The lead in this case is Charlie Babbitt, Tom Cruise, a yuppie asshole who's gotten in over his head trying to import Lamborghinis for sale to other richer yuppie assholes. He has a girlfriend, Susanna, Valeria Golino, that he treats like an object, and a father that he hasn't spoken to in years. And now he never will, since his father is dead. Eager to receive his inheritance, which will help to pay off his debts, Charlie is stunned to find instead that he's been given a deliberately insulting pittance, while the rest of his dad's estate has been placed in trust for the benefit of the older brother. Charlie never knew he had. Raymond, a deeply autistic man living in a facility in Cincinnati. Undaunted, Charlie kidnaps Raymond, sort of legally, he's in the clear, and thus begins a 6-day road trip back to Los Angeles, where Charlie hopes to shake the money out of Raymond, save his business, and screw it to his dead dad. 6 days, of course, is just about exactly as much time as director Barry Levinson and screenwriters Ronald Bass and Barry Morrow need to have Charlie's heart grow 3 sizes, both toward Raymond and the rest of the world as well. It's one of the key films in Cruise's self-conscious development towards becoming a real actor, falling between 1986's The Color of Money and 1989's Born on the 4th of July. He had to fight for the role, which was written for a much older man. And it's probably just as well that he won that fight. The arc of the film requires somebody who seems like an overprivileged, smug asshole at the start, somebody we find appealing enough that spending 2 hours with him sounds like an acceptable prospect, but also somebody who contains no positive characteristics. Cruise in '88 was an outstanding choice to embody all of that, and he does good work. I haven't seen every one of the 10 movie performances he gave prior to this, but it's certainly better than any of the ones I have seen. Confident in his ability to hold focus against the shticky showboating going on next to him without having to fight Hoffman for scenes, a fight he would immediately lose, of course. And willing to trust that the film's arc will make the audience love him by the end, without doing anything to beg for that love in the beginning. It's not a great performance, but it's a more than capable movie star turn, enough to make me feel like Rain Man lets Cruise down more than the other way around, because that ostensible arc is just not there in the screenplay. Charlie's a dick. He's a dick some more. He's a huge dick when they get to Las Vegas and decides to make Raymond cheat at blackjack on his behalf, and then he's kind and good. There's not really anything covering that transition other than the Vegas sequence itself, one of only 2 places in the movie where Levinson puts more than the most straightforward amount of effort into making it look like something. He and the very fine cinematographer John Seal are mostly content to coast by on well-lit naturalism, but in Vegas they start to play around with stronger colors. And editor Stu Linder starts to use some expressionistic cutting to make it feel a bit subjective, and it actually wakes up for a bit. The other place, by the way, is a late sequence when Raymond panics at hearing a smoke alarm and Levinson and Seal break out the handheld camera for a bunch of chaotic close-ups, the one and only part of the whole movie that seems to realize that Raymond might actually have an inner life. This is also the place where, after she storms off in a huff, Susanna returns, not really for any reason. This is also, I think, how the film tries to cheat the Charlie arc. Plainly, for dozens of millions of dollars worth of viewers and the awards votes who gave this 4 Oscars from 8 nominations, that cheat worked out fine. For me, it didn't now, and didn't the only other time I've slogged through the film. It just posits that Charlie is nice now, and since Cruise plays it that way, there's nothing to do but go along with it, or bounce off the film completely. I mean, I had already bounced off the film in my annoyance with Hoffman's performance, but the point remains the same. Working well enough to make the audience buy into a plot development that isn't there is basically the energy Rain Man wants to work at. Given the topic, it might not be obvious, but this is pretty light and breezy. A crowd pleaser that isn't a comedy but has the bubbliness of one. I feel like this was an extremely common mode of filmmaking in the 80s and maybe into the 90s. And Rain Man is merely the most visible example of the form thanks to that Best Picture Oscar. Even its closest comparison point, 1994's fellow Best Picture-winning cross-country adventure about a neuroatypical man, Forrest Gump, has those war scenes and the omnipresent threat of imbalance and violence to keep it from being so loose and playful. Rain Man is ultimately just a nice hangout buddy movie, one that I think doesn't work for a number of reasons. 133 minutes is indecently long for such a thing to begin with, and Hoffman's performance too shrill. It also has an insane, almost unimaginably ill-judged score by Hans Zimmer, who has for some reason decided that this story about two brothers road tripping from Cincinnati to Los Angeles needed a goddamned world music score, one obviously haunted by the ghost of Paul Simon's Graceland, and making the whole thing feel weirdly and ineffectively exoticized. Still, I get the idea of why the film might have worked, if only it was good. Although it roams across expanses of America, Rain Man, citywide, is a small, mostly interior journey, the awakening of two walled-off souls. Actually, it's more like the greening of one soul, Tom Cruise's Charlie Babbitt, and the nudging of another, Dustin Hoffman's Raymond Babbitt, Charlie's older brother, whose autistic condition makes awakening far too dramatic a word. Because we've had dozens of buddy films about journeys of discovery, we can plot the scenario like a roadmap. The special qualities of one will work on the other to change him, or perhaps both of them, and probably not for the worst. In that respect, Rain Man will disappoint no one. It does hold a notable surprise, but more about that later. Though it seems impossible that wheeler-dealer Charlie, Mr. Sharper Image incarnate, will ever put anyone ahead of numero uno, there's a little room for hope by the movie's end. And as far as the unelastic Raymond can stretch, he does, as he moves from lifelong institutionalization to a week of freedom on the road. It's greed on Charlie's part that has brought the two together. Notified that his father has died, he goes back to Cincinnati to lay claim to his estranged parents' estate, some $3 million, only to learn that it's been left in trust to an older brother he never knew he had, Raymond. The next shock is learning that Raymond is autistic and institutionalized. The third shock comes when Charlie virtually kidnaps Raymond and sets out for Los Angeles, hoping to use Raymond's presence as leverage to work a deal for at least part of the money. Charlie's savvy girlfriend Susanna, the splendid Valeria Golino, has put up with his egoism for the year they've gone together, but his cold-heartedness with Raymond disgusts her, and she cuts out early in the trip. Legions of Golino watchers will be pleased to hear that she returns in the predictably crowd-pleasing Las Vegas sequence. Las Vegas aside, the film is an odd, dry odyssey, kept deliberately unsentimental by director Levinson, Diner, Tin Men, by writers Ronald Bass, Gardens of Stone, and Barry Morrow, TV's Bill, on his own, and in particular by Hoffman's spare, poetic performance. Rain Man's singularity lies in the challenge that Hoffman has set himself. In staying true to his character's limitations, Hoffman has an available range of emotions a little narrower than from A to A. Instead of making eye contact, Raymond stares upwards over his partner's shoulder. In the matter of his beloved television show, he has an interior clock more persistent than a migrating bird's. Ordered to choose between two very different options, he will pick one firmly. With the next sentence, he will pick the other. And although his brain functions phenomenally with numbers, the concept of money is forever beyond him. Somehow, Hoffman makes all this hypnotically interesting and, through impeccable timing, sometimes terribly funny, a sweet humor which never betrays Raymond's unalterable character. Identified with the film since its beginnings 3 directors ago, Hoffman creates a walled-off human being whom we understand mostly and whom we worry about prodigiously. Raymond next to high glass windows, Raymond terrified by a sudden loud noise, Raymond put off his rigid rituals of eating, dressing, or watching People's Court. By the time Charlie and Raymond's trip is only half over, we are even seeing the world as Raymond does. As struts, rails, and fence posts fly by on the westbound highway, we suddenly know exactly what Raymond's computer brain is doing with them. It's counting them. However, for an audience, Raymond's condition means that the whole trip is exactly the same. The scenery may change, but like a wind-up walking toy with lifetime batteries, Raymond never will. Everything else, color, variety, intensity, and enough motive power to drive the story forward must come from Cruise. And that's where the picture's surprise lies. As handsome, careless Charlie, an imported car broker about one subpoena away from being a con man, Cruise gives his loosest, most authoritative performance since Risky Business, but one with far greater range and maturity. If Raymond seems rigid, Charlie, when we first meet him, is hardly a limitless fund of patience or tractability either. To watch ordinary decency flower in this rocky soul is an unfolding delight. And it does flower until Charlie's crucial scene with an obtrusive psychiatrist. That small key role turns out to have been played by director Levinson himself. It's a strange choice by a usually sensitive filmmaker, since his talents may not entirely lie in this direction. Here, in what should be Cruise's pivotal scene, Levinson acts as a stone wall, giving back nothing and seemingly unsettling Cruise as well. Audiences will have to decide for themselves whether a pledge that Charlie makes at Rain Man's end will be kept or not. It becomes a sort of Rorschach test of Charlie's character. What no one can argue is that Rain Man, MPAA rated R, is Cruise's quantum leap, so that it can be said unblushingly that he holds his own with the masterly Hoffman. Rain Man was the best thing that ever happened to autism, says psychiatrist Dr. Darold Treffert. No gigantic public education or PR effort could have produced the sensational awareness that Rain Man brought to the national and international radar screen. Treffert, an expert on autism and savant syndrome, worked on Rain Man as a script consultant, which may explain his view on a film that has become divisive in terms of its impact and influence on perceptions of autism. When the Oscar-winning screenwriter Barry Morrow had the idea for Rain Man, he had barely heard of the condition. The word autism never appeared in my original screenplay, he says. Looking back, Rain Man was never a story about autism. It was a tale of 2 estranged brothers, their journey, and then their fragile redemption. Released 30 years ago this week, Rain Man begins when self-centered hustler Charlie Babbitt discovers he has an older brother, Raymond, an institutionalized autistic savant who has inherited all of their father's $3 million fortune. Charlie, bequeathed a 1949 Buick Roadmaster convertible, kidnaps Raymond, and the pair embark on a road trip. Morrow took inspiration for the plot from his own life. He once kidnapped a man with learning disabilities named Bill Sachter to prevent him from being sent back to an institution. That's where basically I got the idea of the kidnapping of Raymond Babbitt. Morrow later turned his friendship with Sachter into the Emmy Award-winning TV movie Bill, starring Mickey Rooney and Dennis Quaid. Then, in 1984, Morrow had a chance encounter with mega-savant Kim Peek. When I met him, says Morrow, he knew all the credits of the movies I'd ever worked on, and every sport question I could challenge him with, he answered. Peek had memorized 12,000 books, often reading 2 pages simultaneously, one with his left eye, the other with his right. Astounded, Morrow locked into him, and the idea for Rain Man was born. The film's journey to the screen was arduous, shedding 3 directors, Martin Brest, Steven Spielberg, and Sidney Pollack, before landing on Barry Levinson. Raymond was played by Dustin Hoffman, then 50 and a character actor at the peak of his powers, alongside the Top Gun hotshot Tom Cruise, 25, as Charlie. In his youth, Hoffman had worked at the New York Psychiatric Institute. For Rain Man, he spent a year intensively researching autistic and savant individuals, including Temple Grandin, Joseph Sullivan, who had incredible skills with numbers, and savant twins George and Charles. Morrow recalls a meeting between Peake and Hoffman, and Peake walking around the room, espousing all these facts, hitting his head and flapping his hands, with Hoffman walking closely behind, mirroring him, almost like he's trying this character on like a coat. The fit was not quite right, and Hoffman created what Treffert calls a composite savant, adding autism to the character. Subsequently, Rain Man led many people to assume that everyone with autism possessed incredible savant abilities. In fact, Treffert points out only 1 out of 10 people with autism are savants, and those with skills akin to Raymond's are exceedingly rare. Rain Man was filmed during the writer's strike of 1988, and Hoffman estimates 90% of his dialogue came from Princeton football star Kevin Guthrie and his autistic brother Peter, from whom he drew many of Raymond's mannerisms. Kevin had made a video of his brother's bedroom for Hoffman, which contains dialogue instantly recognizable from the scene when Charlie invades Raymond's room at Walbrook. Released in December 1988, Rain Man quickly became a global phenomenon. It was the U.S.'s highest-grossing movie of the year and won 4 Oscars, including Best Actor for Hoffman, who thanked the individuals that inspired Raymond in his speech. In terms of medical research and funding, the floodgates opened, says Morrow. In the years following, rates of prevalence for autism spectrum disorder, ASD, as it became known, rose dramatically. Today in the U.S., 1 in 59 children have ASD. A 2010 study identified a global change point year for autism, 1988. Could the cause be what Neurotribe's author Steve Silberman dubbed the Rain Man effect? Treffert agrees with Morrow that maybe the change in prevalence is more than coincidence, but points to other factors such as changes in diagnostic criteria, early infant screening, and a rise in congenital abnormalities overall. 30 years on, as the parent of a child with autism, I view the film very differently. I found watching it again unexpectedly moving, as I identified with Charlie's journey from frustration and bewilderment to understanding. How, I wondered, does the autism community view the movie? Many say that Rain Man is now damaging to autism awareness, and I see their point, says the autism advocate Chris Bonello of Autistic Not Weird, who has Asperger's syndrome. The film, he believes, should be regarded as a piece of history now. When I put this question to Bonello's Facebook community, views were mixed. Although some enjoyed Rain Man, many found it dated and inaccurate. One individual on the spectrum called it the Apu of autism. Despite not being malicious in its portrayal, it's still a poor representation and a stereotype. Morrow, however, takes exception to the word stereotype. Rain Man was, as far as I know, the first film to portray a lead character with either autism or savant syndrome, he says. Perhaps it's become a stereotype in the eyes of some, but it didn't start there. Bonello says the dilemma is that no representation of autism is ever going to satisfy everyone, because it's such a wide spectrum and the people within it are so enormously different to each other, including in how their autism affects them. Yet the analogy with the Simpsons Apu controversy is interesting. Today, there is growing criticism of non-disabled actors cripping up. But even back in 1988, the New Yorker critic Pauline Kael slated Hoffman's depiction of Raymond, asking why the movie people didn't just have an autistic person play the part. Ali Vaugh, who is a late-diagnosed autistic who happens actually to be a savant, says she feels unwelcome in the autism community, largely because of the stigma with this movie. However, she says, I'm not certain the people who are so vocally repulsed by Rain Man remember what it was like in 1988. To even suggest that Raymond was a human with basic dignity was a really big deal. Kevin Guthrie agrees that he was someone you could love, you could root for, that you could be disappointed that he was going back to Walbrook. That was something that you didn't have for autistic people at that time. Raymond's return to the institution is considered problematic today, but the happy ever after originally envisaged by Morrow would have been too Hollywood, says Guthrie. Morrow feels the revised ending was the right one. It sat there in people's subconscious like that little grain of sand that irritates the oyster that creates the pearl. The representation of autism on screen is increasing, although Bonello observes people have mixed feelings about whether or not the representation is accurate or meaningful. Since Rain Man, a string of films have featured autistic characters, including Temple Grandin, Mozart and the Whale, My Name is Khan, and Please Stand By. Netflix series Atypical and ABC's The Good Doctor are popular on the small screen, and a groundbreaking milestone was reached in 2017 with the release of Keep the Change, in which the lead roles were played by actors on the spectrum. Rain Man's legacy for autism, it seems, is complex, a mixture of incredibly positive impact and enduring misinterpretation. One for bad, two for good, says Raymond as he boards the train back to Walbrook. Bet two for good, says Charlie. Rain Man is an oddball buddy road movie that nearly drowns in a tsunami of sentimentality and predictability. An unabashed crowd pleaser, the 1989 Best Picture Oscar winner has aged poorly, its marginal likability fading like an old Polaroid snapshot as the passage of years have shown how remarkably unremarkable everything is, including the much ballyhooed performance of Dustin Hoffman. Considering some of the great movies released in 1988, including fellow Oscar nominees Dangerous Liaisons and Mississippi Burning and popular fare like Die Hard and A Fish Called Wanda, it's a travesty that Rain Man claimed the mantle of the year's top film. Perhaps the astounding total domestic gross, $172 million, inflation adjusted to about $390 million in today's currency, had something to do with that. The movie chronicles the emotional and physical journeys of two mismatched brothers as they traverse the country, traveling from Cincinnati to Los Angeles by car, and get to know one another. The twist is that the older man, Raymond, Dustin Hoffman, is an autistic savant who is incapable of being in a normal human relationship. His younger brother, Charlie, Tom Cruise, is a hustler whose reasons for bonding with Raymond are initially financial. He wants to become Raymond's caretaker so he can have access to the latter's $3 inheritance, money Charlie feels he's entitled to at least half of. Charlie is a slick businessman, but when it comes to interpersonal relationships, he's not very good. His long-suffering girlfriend, Susanna, Valeria Golino, can attest to that. She resents his coldness and is visibly frustrated by the dead end toward which their romance appears to be headed. Then Charlie gets word that his father has died. Although he was estranged from the old man, Charlie dutifully attends the funeral and meets with the lawyer, expecting a big payday. Instead, he learns that he has an older brother, Raymond, who is institutionalized because he's incapable of living in normal society. The newly rich brother has no concept of what it means to have money, so Charlie kidnaps him with the intention of using Raymond as a conduit to the inheritance. Susanna, having lost patience with Charlie, walks out on him, leaving the brothers to fend for themselves. Charlie intends to fly back to L.A. with Raymond in tow, but problems arise when Raymond refuses to board a plane. A 3-hour trip becomes a 3-day tour, with Charlie increasingly pushed to the brink by Raymond's specific dietary and schedule-related requirements. Although Rain Man was widely loved when it was released 30-plus years ago, it's a classic example of a motion picture that was honored for in-the-moment views rather than with an eye toward its long-term reputation. Its progressive views of those with autism are embarrassing by today's standards, and its overall superficiality makes one wonder what the voters were thinking when they cast their ballots in the early days of 1989. One open question that has never been resolved is whether Dustin Hoffman's Oscar-winning performance is a good, honest interpretation of an autistic savant, or whether it's a cringe-worthy caricature. That debate, lively during the 1989 Oscar season, was never settled, and watching the film all these years later, I can see the points on both sides. Hoffman studied the mannerisms of various autistic individuals and used those observations to inform his portrayal. But the screenplay softens the character with a kind of magical realism that undercuts the inherent honesty Hoffman was attempting to bring out. The result is to use manipulation to make Raymond sympathetic by downplaying his negative traits or turning them into lovable quirks. One could argue that Tom Cruise, with his less showy and more grounded performance, is the better actor, although the script fast-forwards his transformation in such a way that it's not believable. Charlie goes from being an asshole to an advocate in a few scenes with too little motivation. It's a classic example of telling instead of showing. One weird scene is jarring when viewed today: the elevator kiss. Susanna, trying to initiate Raymond into the possibilities of affection between men and women, forces an unwanted kiss on the unsuspecting older brother. His eventual verdict: it's wet. This scene, intended to be playful and received that way in 1988, is borderline creepy in 2020. The film's permissive attitude toward an inappropriate encounter says a lot about how society's views have changed over the last 3 decades. If one was to look at director Barry Levinson's filmography, one might assume that Rain Man was his career high point. After all, he won his only Best Director Oscar for it. Reflected through the prism of decades, it's one of his lesser films, certainly trailing the likes of The Natural, Avalon, Good Morning, Vietnam, Wag the Dog, and Justice for All, which he co-wrote but didn't direct. It's easy to assail Rain Man as one of the least deserving recipients of the Best Picture Oscar for the simple reason that it is one of the least deserving recipients of the Best Picture Oscar, rounding out a decade that was replete with such examples. Others include Ordinary People, Out of Africa, and Terms of Endearment. The film's greatest asset, that it warmed the hearts of those watching as two brothers overcame barriers to form a deep bond, seems false and saccharine in the way it is approached. The only aspect of the relationship that survives is the chemistry between Hoffman and Cruise. That continues to shine even though most of the rest of Rain Man has dried up. Decided to start watching all of the Oscar Best Picture winners in order. I hadn't heard of some of these movies, some I love and have seen multiple times already, and I actively hate others, planning to never watch them again. Fair warning, there will be spoilers in these and other reviews to help explain my point of view. Rain Man is a movie that I have always liked. Rewatching it for this project reminded me just how unlikable Tom Cruise's character Charlie is, which is of course against type for him. But otherwise, this is the movie I remembered and I still really like it a lot. Charlie and Raymond's dad has died, at which time Charlie learns of Raymond's existence. Upset that his father has left his estate in a trust to allow for Raymond's care, Charlie essentially abducts Raymond in order to gain access to the funds for himself. Because, or Raymond's autism, he is afraid to fly, among other things. So Charlie and Dustin Hoffman's Raymond, or Rain Man, as little Charlie mispronounced his name as a child, have to drive from Cincinnati, where Raymond lives, back to Charlie's home in Los Angeles. Along the way, we learn more about Raymond's unique abilities with numbers and also see Charlie grow into a much better person simply through learning to love his brother. It's really sad to learn that Charlie and Raymond never had to be separated. Due to a misunderstanding when Charlie was almost burned by hot water, Raymond was accused of hurting Charlie, which is why he was institutionalized. If only this hadn't happened, both of their lives could have been different since they each develop a bond and come to care about each other quite a bit over their time spent together. Luckily, the movie ends with the promise of the brothers having developed a relationship that will continue, even as Raymond goes back to the institution, which is honestly the environment that's best for his need for routine and habit. Plot-wise, not a lot happens in Rain Man, but it doesn't have to, since this is a character-driven film, where the point is what develops between Charlie and Raymond, not necessarily what they do along the way. Which is why the road trip storytelling device works. If this had been told in a more conventional way, there wouldn't have been the natural opportunities for emotional discovery in such a short time. Did this deserve to win the Oscar? Over what it was nominated with? Yes. Over the other eligible films that could have been nominated? Hard to say. Gorillas in the Mist, Dangerous Liaisons, The Accused, and The Accidental Tourist are all movies for which a Best Picture nomination could be considered deserved. Rain Man got the nod and the win, and I am fine with it. This isn't a perfect film or necessarily one of my favorites, but I enjoy it and consider it very well made all around. Hoffman deserved his Oscar, and Cruise should have been nominated as well. Perhaps he was canceled out by Hoffman since they were both leads. It wouldn't be accurate to suggest that Cruise should have been nominated as supporting actor. Regardless of the awards, Rain Man is great. 3.5 out of 5 stars. One of the year's most intriguing film premises. A callow young hustler, Tom Cruise, must gain the confidence of his autistic brother, Dustin Hoffman, in order to pry away from him an enormous inheritance, is given uneven, slightly off-target treatment in UA's Rain Man. Casting of Cruise and various other aspects suggest an attempt to broaden audience appeal rather than deepen the story. Even so, Pick should do very well as a quality alternative in a holiday box office dominated by comedies. Hoffman's character Raymond Babbitt is an autistic savant, a person extremely limited in some mental areas and extremely gifted in others. His younger brother, hard-driving luxury car dealer Charlie Babbitt, Cruise, has his limitations too, mostly in the areas of kindness and understanding. Unaware of Raymond's existence, he'd been institutionalized when Charlie was very young. Until his estranged father dies, Charlie is brought up short when he learns the old man's entire $3 million fortune has been willed to his brother. After a trip to the East Coast institution where Raymond resides, Charlie shanghais him, without regard for his welfare, into a cross-country trip to L.A., dangling a Dodger game as bait. Meanwhile, he threatens Raymond's guardian, the bland Dr. Bruner, Jerry Molen, with a custody battle unless he hands over half the fortune. Director Barry Levinson, Diner, Good Morning Vietnam, lingers long on the road trip segment, building the relationship between the brothers degree by degree and decorating it with spectacular, if self-conscious landscapes shot through tinted lenses. Result is lightly engrossing, buoyed here and there by emergence of Raymond's unique abilities. For example, he can memorize half a telephone book in an evening and also can perform extravagant multiplications in a flash. Along the way, Charlie, whose talents seem at first confined to barking orders and being inconsiderate, is getting his edges buffed by Raymond's ingratiating eccentricities and attachment to routine. Then Charlie learns by phone in Tucumcari, NM, that he's just lost $80,000 in a business deal, and Pick's placid surface erupts in a bombast of music and camera tricks as he takes Raymond to the Las Vegas gaming tables to exploit his mathematical genius. Needless to say, it's a very successful idea. Raymond even learns a little about women, and in a charming scene with Cruise, learns how to dance. For most of its longish 140 minutes, Rain Man is limited by its subject. It's about getting to know a guy, Raymond, who can't respond or change except by the slightest degrees. Road segment often feels hastily, loosely written, with much extraneous screen time. By the last third, Pick becomes quite moving as these two very isolated beings discover a common history and deep attachment. If an actor with more range than Cruise had been cast, Pick might have gone over the top in its final scenes. As is, it stops a little short. It's a mature assignment for Cruise, and he's at his best in the darker scenes. When the executor of the will shields information from him, the actor displays an utterly grim, brick-headed determination that is frightening. Hoffman achieves an exacting physical characterization of Raymond, from his constant nervous movements to his rigid, hunched shoulders and childish gait. Though he can neither look anyone in the eye nor engage in real conversation, Raymond certainly can be funny, with his well-timed, offhand responses to Charlie's hammering questions. Raymond, am I using you? Yeah. Italian actress Valeria Golino strikes just the right chord as Charlie's sensitive, long-suffering girlfriend. The treatment of people with mental health issues has changed dramatically since 1988, so it's a little weird to hear the word retard thrown around so quickly when watching this in 2018. Still, I'm not going to turn this review into a rant about political correctness or whatever. It's just a little weird. But I guess it's to be expected from a story about a grown man, Charlie Babbitt, Tom Cruise, discovering he has a secret older brother, Raymond, Dustin Hoffman, who happens to be a high-functioning autistic savant. How does Charlie find out? When he is told that he didn't inherit anything from his late father's estate, but a classic car and some rose bushes. The $3 million has instead been bequeathed to an unnamed trustee who turns out to be Raymond. In a misguided attempt to gain half of the fortune, Charlie kidnaps Raymond from the mental institute he has been living in for years. They set off on an epic road trip from Cincinnati to Los Angeles, where Charlie hopes to gain custody of his brother in order to control the inheritance. When it comes to narrative, Rain Man is often a bit thin and patchy in places. Many of the road trip scenes feel unnecessary and long. The film is over 2 hours in length, but there is plenty of material that repeats itself. It could easily have been cut down to make the pace better. The overall emotional character development of Charlie Babbitt feels kind of superficial in the long run and is definitely rushed to give him some form of redemption. There is a single turning point in the relationship between the two, and suddenly everything that has gone before is different. It doesn't have a natural flow and deserves to build slowly and realistically. However, this film is undeniably captivating. That comes down to the main performances and the direction. Director Barry Levinson manages to elevate the trite road trip movie with his visuals and gives it some more excitement. But really, this is a film made on the performance of Dustin Hoffman as Raymond. His performance is superb. It feels so understated, and there are times when it's almost as if he's not doing anything. However, it is a deep and intricate performance. It's an exciting thing to see, and you can see why he was so universally praised. Alongside him, Cruise perhaps gives one of the performances of his lifetime, which may not be saying much in the long run. Cruise is attempting real acting here, and there are moments of understated brilliance in his performance. He has potentially the tougher job to do by acting against a man who is avoiding any emotional reaction. Really, I'm glad that I finally watched Rain Man, but I can't say that it will become one of my favorite films. There are funny moments and some real tenderness. However, it is a bit up and down. There are definite things that don't work, and you can't avoid the idea that in other hands it would have been a flop. There was every chance that the portrayal of an autistic man by a non-autistic actor could have turned into a horrible parody. Hoffman manages to keep it on the straight and narrow. Unlike the choppy narrative which moves all over the place, Rain Man is about a self-centered, superficial yuppie who goes back home to cash out on his inheritance after finding out that his estranged father has suddenly passed away. Upon discovering that his father more or less shafted him in the will and gave his $3 million estate to an unnamed beneficiary, our guy tracks down the said anonymous recipient who ends up being the autistic older brother that his parents never told him about. So in an emotional moment of poor judgment, the younger brother decides to semi-kidnap his big bro, drives to LA for 6 days until someone pays him his half of the $3 million, and in the meanwhile gets to know the sibling he never had who couldn't be any different from what he expected. Being someone who watches an unhealthy amount of movies that range from The Godfather to Survive Style +5, there aren't a whole lot of big names that have fallen through the cracks over the years. Still haven't seen Black Hawk Down, still need to carve out those 4 hours to sit through Gone with the Wind, and until this past weekend, Rain Man was high up on that very same embarrassing list. No idea how it ended up there considering how many times I'd surfed past it on TBS over the years, but that Ted Turner and the rest of the world sure knew something I didn't because this movie really is something else. This is exactly I need to revisit Diner, The Natural, and introduce myself to Tin Men because Barry Levinson really was great behind the camera way back when. Long before the days of Man of the Year, Envy and handful of other winners that I'm sure Levinson would like to pretend never happened, this guy was making and writing some seriously good movies that still hold up to this day thanks to memorable, believable characters and the vivid, familiar settings that surrounded them. But while none of the writing credit actually goes to him this time around, even though it sounds awfully close to something he would write, all those gorgeous, sprawling Midwest landscapes that highlight so much of this road trip to the retro finishes that make it look like the coolest parts of Happy Days got magically transported 3 decades into the future, those are all Barry, and he makes this baby look gorgeous. It's simple, it's sparse, and it's perfect. It keeps your attention focused on the characters. It's good old American eye candy at its best, and it makes the trip that much more captivating outside of all the back and forths about the People's Court, pancakes, and toothpicks. I never knew the stretch between Cincinnati and L.A. had more to offer than corn as far as the eye can see. But it's a far cry from the Manhattan skyline, and I think that's one of the many stunning things about it. So, way to go, Barry. Sure do love those sunsets. But as far as the writing credit is concerned, that right there goes to Ronald Bass and Barry Morrow, who totally deserved the Oscars they nabbed for this. Then again, I really don't know where the hell this script came from, being that these guys don't have a whole lot else on their resumes worth bragging about. But whatever. What matters is that it's right up Levinson's alley. And that's a fine place to be. It's riddled with phenomenal dialogue from beginning to end. It's incredibly heartfelt and honest in ways that never feel cheap or melodramatic. It's a brilliant premise to work off of. But more than anything else, these guys created two absolutely exceptional characters to center a movie around. And as with any great script, it helps to have great performances there to deliver it all. On the one hand is Dustin Hoffman as our autistic savant, Raymond Babbitt, and in completely unsurprising fashion, he's out of sight. Why? Because he's Dustin fucking Hoffman, that's why. But even so, this is a serious achievement for the guy, for any actor really. It's the voice, the nervous tics, the little moments where his actions completely transcend the idiot label he gets pegged with, and the dozens of other things that ultimately makes Raymond seem just as normal as his brother, despite the initial instinct to write him off as something less. I watched Hoffman do his thing, and the one thing that kept coming to mind is this guy either doing one hell of a good impression or he is digging real deep right now. Or both. It's so impressive the way Hoffman presents Ray so that you don't pity him, but rather he's misunderstood in a way most people will never understand. Not an easy balance to strike, but he does it flawlessly and he makes you want to learn more. But that's what you expect from Dustin Hoffman. What I didn't expect was Tom Cruise as Charlie Babbitt, the biggest hotshot asshole of the 80s, this side of Bud Fox. Now, I've never really been sold on Cruise, even though he's proved himself time and time again as a solid actor, and I was expecting him to start playing second fiddle here as soon as Hoffman entered the picture. But strangely enough, between him and Hoffman, he totally ended up with the better character arc of the two. God, he's so spot on as the bratty, materialistic asshole for so much of the movie, and to watch that pent-up angst slowly fade away with each new epiphany that Raymond's presence brings about, it's enough to make a grown man cry. After this, I really need to give Tom a break and accept that he's no joke when he puts his mind to it. He really is great, and even if Hoffman won the Oscar in a year where Cruise didn't even get nominated, the proof is very much in the pudding. Folks, Levinson and the script really add so much to why this movie works so well, but watching these two go from strangers to brothers is simply wonderful. The bathwater scene, Charlie teaching Ray how to dance in their Vegas suite, my personal favorite, Ray's first wet kiss. There's just so many great moments between the two from one scene to the next, and it choked me up as much it had me laughing. If you have a brother, it'll make you appreciate him that much more. And if you don't, you might just wish you did. I realize that I've now gone through every adjective in the book to describe everything that I effing loved about this movie, but it really did blow me away far more than I thought it would. It's about family no matter what, forgiveness and looking past the surface, and while I might have been outrageously late in discovering it, Rain Man is a stunner. It's nothing fancy, and that's one hell of a combination when it's done right. Just so damn good on every front. Never gonna surf past this one again, never been resolved. Is whether Dustin Hoffman's Oscar-winning performance is a good, honest interpretation of an autistic savant, or whether it's a cringeworthy caricature that debate lively during the 1989 Oscar. Season was never settled, and watching the film all these years later, I can see the points on both sides Hoffman studied. The mannerisms of various autistic individuals and use those observations to inform his portrayal. But the Screenplay softens the character with a kind of magical realism that undercuts the inherent honesty Hoffman was. Attempting to bring out the result is to use manipulation to make Raymond sympathetic by downplaying his negative traits or turning them into lovable quirks. One could argue that Tom Cruise, with his less showy and more grounded performance, is the better actor, although the script fast-forwards his transformation in such a way that it's not believable. Charlie goes from being an advocate in a few scenes with too little motivation. It's a classic example of telling instead of showing. One weird scene is jarring when viewed today. The elevator kiss Susanna, trying to initiate Raymond into the possibilities of affection between men and women, forces an unwanted kiss on the unsuspecting older brother. His eventual verdict, "It's wet," this scene intended to be playful and received that way in 1988, is borderline creepy in 2020. The film's permissive attitude toward an inappropriate encounter says a lot about how society's views have changed over the last 3 decades. If one was to look at director Barry Levinson's filmography, one might assume that Raymond was his career high point. After all, he won his only Best Director Oscar. For it reflected through the prism of decades. It's one of his lesser films, certainly trailing the likes of the Natural, Avalon, Good Morning, Vietnam, Wag the Dog, and Injustice for All, which he co-wrote but didn't direct. It's easy to assail Rain Man as one of the least deserving recipients of the Best Picture Oscar for the simple reason that it is one of the least deserving recipients of the Best Picture Oscar, rounding out a decade that was replete with such examples. Others include Ordinary People Out of Africa and Terms of Endearment. The film's greatest asset, that it warmed the hearts of those watching as Two Brothers Over came barriers to form a deep bond, seems false and saccharine in the way it is approached. The only aspect of the relationship that survives is the chemistry between Hoffman and Cruise that continues to shine, even though most of the rest of Rain Man has dried up. More detail. Rain Man is a movie based around two brothers, Charlie Babbitt, Tom Cruise, and his brother Raymond Babbitt, Dustin Hoffman, throughout his life. Charlie Babbitt has never known he had a brother. And when his father dies, that he cares little of in the will, he expects all of his father's possessions to go to him. But from a strange occurrence, nearly all his possessions are given to an unknown character. This creates anger in Charlie, and he sets out to try and find the mysterious character. Events unfold, and the future holds many strange things that Charlie never thought he would have. The performance by Tom Cruise as the full of himself, anger-induced younger brother who tries to keep his cool while also babysitting at the start of the film, to the end of the film, where you see a calmer, more positive character and spending time with someone he didn't even know existed. But the performance of Dustin Hoffman shows in this movie, playing the older brother to Tom Cruise as an autistic savant. He brings a realistic look on what people with this type of disability have. For example, when asked questions, they would give the same answer over and over again, B. If it was right or wrong, it's a very well done performance. And just like Tom Cruise's character at the start, Dustin Hoffman's character is very shy at the start of the movie, but also being very curious. And towards the end of the movie, he is calmer and more relatable. These two give all-round great performances that work very well together, as they are so different at the start, but become closer. As the movie go on, it makes you feel like this is a true bond that really brings this movie to life. It surprises me that as of this writing, it has been 30 years since Rain Man hit the zeitgeist of the United States. You couldn't go anywhere without hearing people talk about being an excellent driver. Perhaps that is why Rain Man has both aged poorly and is not as well remembered as other films. Even from 1988, I'd argue that Boo, Durham, and Dangerous Liaison are more remembered. Rain Man is so dominated by one performer that everything else is all but forgotten. Some of that being good, some being unfair. Charlie Babbitt. Tom Cruise is feverishly trying to save his luxury car import business, which is facing problems from EPA regulators and his creditors. Fortunately for him, he's learned that his estranged father, Sanford, has died, unfortunately for him. He also learns that Daddy Dearest has left him nothing except a 1949 Buick Roadmaster and some rose bushes, understandably enraged at having the rest of his estate coming at $3 million cut off from him. A little digging turns up some surprises. The big surprise is that he has a here unknown brother, Raymond Dustin Hoffman. Raymond has been in situ IED at a mental hospital for decades, but to both Charlie and his girlfriend Susan's Valeria Golino astonishment, Raymond is able to not only identify the car, but that he is what is called an autistic savant, image result for Raymond movie. Raymond's autism allows him to be masterful with numbers, but he has poor social skills. Nevertheless, Charlie essentially kidnaps his challenged brother to try and get at half the inheritance. He is perpetually callous towards Raymond, so much so that Susanna leaves in disgust, even as Charlie's business is starting to fail. Charlie must endure the difficulty of Raymond, which among other things means Raymond won't fly to Los Angeles. Raymond, knowing all the airplanes have crashed, save Qantas Charlie's force to drive them from Cincinnati to Law, much to his irritation at his irritating older brother Charlie, perpetually snaps at Raymond until he discovers that Raymond is also Rainman, a vague childhood memory whom Charlie always thought was an imaginary friend. In reality, Charlie's memory of the imaginary Rainman was really a faint recollection of Raymond, which a toddler Charlie could not pronounce properly. As they continue on their journey, Charlie soon starts seeing his brother in a different light. Not that it stops him from using Raymond to count cards in Las Vegas, earning enough to pay off his debts after an informal hearing to determine what is best for Raymond. Charlie finally gives up and sees that it would be best to return him to the hospital. The emotionalist Raymond takes all this in, and Charlie and Raymond's caretaker doctor reach an agreement. Raymond returns to Cincinnati, and Charlie tells him he'll see him in a couple of weeks, which Raymond has calculated to the second related image eyes, since that the only thing people really remember from Rainman is Hoffman's performance, but that is not necessarily a compliment. 30 years on, people still mimic Hoffman's. I'm an excellent driver, complete with blank tone, cocked head, and almost dead eyes. Mentions about definitely in that same tone also permeate the lexicon, even if people may not remember the film itself. Hoffman, good or ill, so swallows Rain Man that he drowns out everything else. This is quite curious, given that Rain Man should be Charlie's story, his growth and evolution from callow youth to genuinely loving brother. We won't even go into the curious situation of having Cruz play Hoffman's younger brother. Despite the fact that Hoffman is old enough to be Cruz's father, there's a 25-year age gap between Hoffman and Cruz at the time Rainman was made. The former was 51, the latter 26. If we go by the events chronicled in Rainman, Charlie would have been 2 years old, and Raymond would have been 27 when they last saw each other. Yes, theoretically, there can be an age gap that wide between siblings, but that tends to be for half-siblings more than full siblings, according to the film. Sanford Babbitt was 4'5" when Charlie was born. If we use the actual age difference, that would have made Sanford 20 when Raymond was born again plausible. But how old exactly was their late mother when either Raymond or Charlie were born? Or am I once again getting hung up on details? Have I also digressed? Rain Man is a good reminder of when Tom Cruise actually acted, as opposed to being the action star he has grown into. And no, that is not a short joke. As Cruise and I are the same height, Cruise makes the evolution of Charlie more believable. Even if the script made it feel surprisingly rushed, it's a credit to Cruise as an actor that he made Charlie into someone we could care about, even if his actions were horrible for better or worse. Though despite how strong Cruise is, Rainman is all Hoffman all the time. Pauline Kael, the Doing a Film Criticism, eviscerated Rainman, and especially Hoffman humping one note on a piano for 2 hours and 11 minutes, she famous described it. There is truth to Cale's statement. We can cut Hoffman some slack, and that Raymond is simply incapable of change as the autistic, much older brother. He cannot suddenly have realization or understanding. However, in many ways, Hoffman is about the performance, and Raymond gives him a chance to act up a storm with Raymond's various quirks, his lack of emotion, his flat voice, his body movements from his stillness to his sudden fits of fear and rage. Our man is not going to let one see a change in Raymond. Rather, he's just the vehicle for Charlie's change, and a character that allows for a full-on performance. Where I think Rain Man suffers is in Barry Morrow and Ronald Bass' screenplay. At one point, I thought it would have been easier for Charlie to sedate Raymond to get him on the plane, as Raymond seems fine in taking the train. Why not have simply done that rather than take this long road trip? I know, questions of logic, because you had to have the road trip. How else to get to Vegas? It's certainly amusing to see how, despite being a hustler, Charlie is unaware that the casinos wouldn't catch on to his questionable winning Rain Man. Plays with the audience. And while I see where it's going in terms of the story of brotherly love and redemption, I still found it too long and a trifle insincere. I still think Rainman will be remembered for two things: winning Best Picture and Hoffman's now much paired performance. I don't think it's terrible, but apart from those two elements, who really remembers Rainman? Extra information? Barry? Levinson's Rain Man was so seminal a film that its title character's nickname and dialogue have entered the vernacular. We've all said Kmart sucks, and I'm an excellent driver once or twice, right? Beneath the film's gentle odd couple comedy, an astonishingly affecting performance by Dustin Hoffman as the autistic savant Raymond Babbitt, however, is a sharp drama about emotionality, and the capacity we all have for surprising ourselves by changing Charlie. Babbitt, Tom Cruise, is the classic 80s shark, cold, all business, seemingly without a care for anyone but himself when his wealthy, estranged father dies and leaves him only an insulting token. A 1949 Buick Roadmaster that was the cause of their estrangement. Charlie discovers that the $3 million estate has been left in trust for a brother Raymond he never knew. Had determined to get his half of the money Charlie steals Ray from the institution. That is his home in Cincinnati, planning to take him back to Charlie's home-in-law and fight for custody of Ray. Rye refuses to fly. Airline travel's very dangerous, so they hit the road in the Roadmaster. The week-long trip is an exercise in frustration for Charlie Ray as a mass of idiosyncratic routines and nervous habits. He won't go out in the rain. He recites Who's on First when he's upset. That incense. Charlie, stop acting like an idiot. Charlie tells Rye, but Charlie starts to feel a connection to Rye when he realizes that he's the Rain Man of his vague childhood memory, reconnecting Charlie with a family he lost long before. Yet when Charlie tries to express this new closeness by hugging Rye, starts screaming. He doesn't like to be touched, and he's incapable of understanding or sharing in his brother's feeling. Nothing affects Rye emotionally, or at least not in the same way it does Charlie or any of the rest of us. And the ironic thing is, it's because of Raymond that Charlie learns to open up and connect with other human beings. Charlie's relationship with Rye mirrors the relationship Charlie has with his patient girlfriend, Susanna. Valeria Golino. When Charlie continues to fail to really communicate with Rye, he yells at his brother. You can't tell me you're not in there somewhere, echoing Susanna's earlier complaint that she feels like she's alone when she's with Charlie. Charlie tries to reach out to Rye and gets nothing in return, just as Susanna failed with Charlie Ray's isolation may not be by choice, but Charlie's was, though he probably didn't realize it. You use people, you're using Raymond to get his inheritance. Susanna accuses Charlie, but by the end of the movie, Charlie seems a bit overwhelmed to discover that it's not about the money anymore. Instead, Charlie wants to know, why didn't anyone tell me I had a brother? It'd have been nice to know him for more than just the past 6 days. Rain Man is one of my earliest favorite movies, and rewatching it makes me appreciate what a masterpiece it is. Nominated for 8 Oscars and winning 4, including Best Picture. The story tackles mental illness at a time when information and material presenting it was scarce. The film stars Dustin Hoffman and Tom Cruise as 2 brothers meeting for the first time and embarking on an epic cross-country road trip. Hoffman received high praise for his performance as a character born with autism, while Hoffman's accolades winning Best Actor are well-deserved. It's Cruise who pulls off a memorable role with immense energy and charisma. It's one of the best character arcs you'll find on film. The backstory for the primary characters is fully fleshed out in a handful of early scenes. Charlie Babbitt Cruise is a selfish 80s, who left home at an early age, dissing his father. He's a selfish bully who verbally mistreats his loving girlfriend, Susanna Valeria Golino, and his employee, Charlie, meets Raymond, Hoffman, older brother. In a way I won't spoil here, understandably. It's a shock for him to discover a sibling he never knew he had. The ensuing story taking the brothers on an epic road trip from Cincinnati to Los Angeles is charged with humor and touching interactions along the journey. Rain Man is essential. A 2-character show with Charlie and Raymond, the only people we see for the film's majority. Each actor does a tremendous job with their part, and they have organic rapport. The film makes us believe the pair are blood, relatives getting to know each other despite their abundance of differences. The character growth of Charlie is one of the best and steepest climbs in any movie I've seen. Cruise's skill here will make you appreciate him as an actor, and the advantage to having 2 leads is we really get a feel for their thoughts and lives. The plot of A Rain Man revolves solely around them. Director Barry Levinson includes masterful shots and scene-framing techniques that present a cinematic work of art. The opening scene enforces our presence in 1988 as a crane airlifts a Lamborghini to a dealership lot. Another great moment includes a flawless follow shot amidst a highly tense argument between Charlie and Susanna. The soundtrack by Hans Zimmer is great, and one that stirs emotional juices in every scene as we embark on a road trip unlike any other in film with the brothers Babbitt. I enjoyed the realistic nature that the story has. Without spoilers, the best scenes and ending itself may have been ruined if done with a modern soft style. Rain Man pulls no punches with its blunt nature. This includes laugh-out-loud moments as well as incredibly tense parts that leave your emotions nearly drained. This film, directed by Barry Levinson, screenplay by Barry Morrow, Ronald Bass, story by Barry Morrow. Produced by Mark Johnson, starring Dustin Hoffman, Tom Cruise, Valeria Golino. Cinematography, John, edited by Stu Linder. Music by Hans Zimmer Production Companies. United Artists, Guber-Peters Company, Star Partners 2 Ltd. Distributed by MGM's UA Communications Company. Release date December 16th, 1988. Running time 134 minutes. Country United States language, English. Budget $25 million. Box office $354,943,000 in 2024. So guys, this is the review of Rain Man movie and some information about how do you like our today's video. Please let us know by commenting. And if you like this video, please like it, share it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.